Hello, listeners. This is Janine
and Kristen
from Henrico Casa. You are listening to our podcast, Vigilant Voices. Living life every day. Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining us today for another guest episode of our Vigilant Voices podcast.
Yes, we're glad you're here with us, and we know you'll learn a lot from our discussion today. But before we dive in, we just want to kind of preface that we are recording this episode because we want you to know before October even starts that October is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Yes, we see domestic violence or intimate partner violence, as it's also called, in our work at CASA quite often. And we appreciate this time to raise awareness about domestic violence, support survivors, and work toward the main goal of prevention. And that is why we specifically invited today's guest to the show.
Yes, and today's guest is a fellow Vigilant Voice working as the Domestic Violence Coordinator for Henrico County's Police Division.
And she is also and always a friend to CASA, willing to share her knowledge with our volunteers to help them recognize and respond to domestic violence concerns in the most appropriate way. So we know that you will also appreciate learning from her today too. So welcome, Beth Bonniwell.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're so glad you could join us. And as Janine said, we consider you to be a fellow Vigilant Voice, and we so appreciate your commitment to the health and safety of victims in our community. But before we dive into your work, we'd love for you to just tell us and our listeners a little bit about yourself and maybe what led to your career protecting others.
Sure. I'm a social worker, and I love to cook, and I love to read. I love to relax. And take walks. And travel, of course.
Yeah.
I have worked as the Domestic Violence Coordinator for Henrico County Police for over 20 years now.
Okay.
And some of the things, there's been many things that have led me to this career, but CASA has been so instrumental in leading me on this career path. My grandparents were CASA volunteers.
I didn't know that.
Yep. That was
so
kind of my
cool.
first introduction to CASA when I was younger. And then when I went to graduate school, my field placement, one of them was with Melissa O'Neill at the Department of Criminal Justice Services.
Okay.
Love it.
Yes.
Another
Melissa is the Virginia CASA program coordinator. And I was going to say, first, she's an amazing supervisor, and she's an amazing person.
I can see that.
And I'm just so thankful to have met her and to have learned from her. And so from there, I became a CASA volunteer with Chesterfield County, a board member for Henrico County CASA. And then I also will say that my work at Greater Richmond Stop Child Abuse Now, or SCAN, has furthered my commitment to this career path.
Yeah, which is...
Oh my goodness, you have so many sweet connections
so many good ties
to our work. Yeah, and all the people that we know well. That's awesome. I didn't realize that.
Yes. So, okay, Beth, so all of these awesome experiences, led you down this path. And so, as we mentioned, you are currently and have been for 2 decades. Hard to say that out loud, right?
Right.
Yes. The Domestic Violence Coordinator for Henrico County's Police Division. And so first and foremost, I think we'd love for you to explain to our listeners and even define, what do we mean when we say domestic violence or intimate partner violence?
I'm going to keep this definition very short and sweet.
Yeah.
Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behaviors used by one person in any relationship to gain or maintain power and control over another person.
Okay. And see, that's so interesting because, and listener, maybe you're like me, but my mind has always gone straight to physical violence when I hear domestic violence. But the way you just explained it, my mind is going to things beyond assault, right? Can you maybe give us more examples of like what domestic violence can look like, or maybe help us understand like what is or isn't a crime, if that makes sense?
Sure. Kristen, I don't think it's unusual to go to physical violence.
Okay. That's just right where my head went, right?
Yes. So physical violence, and within physical violence, there's so many acts: strangulation and suffocation, which are both near fatal acts and can have such long-lasting symptoms. There are so many other forms, though.
Okay.
Stalking, and I'll give some examples of each of these
that would be great.
Help make it more relatable.
Sure.
So stalking, that can be repeated calls, emails, text messages, showing up at someone's home or work, leaving unwanted gifts, following or tracking someone, cyber stalking, which is the monitoring of online activity.
Yeah.
Or sending threats over social media.
Okay.
And then that brings to mind technology abuse.
Right.
This can be used to monitor, harass, or threaten someone. I think about revenge porn, which is posting photos without someone's consent. Maybe coercing someone to share their passwords or not letting a person have access to technology.
Okay.
Locking somebody in or out of a vehicle or their home. And there's lots of other controlling Internet of Things out there because our homes and our cars are now so connected to the internet. So when you think about our smart home devices, it is having the ability to control a thermostat, a vacuum, a bed, lights, refrigerators. So technology abuse is huge.
I have never thought about any of that, side note, and that is really scary.
That's really scary.
Wow.
Yeah, it is so terrifying when you come home after a long day of work. Maybe you've parted ways on the relationship, but somebody still has access to all of those things in your home and think what they're doing all night long or all day long and running up the bills, which brings me to economic abuse.
Yes.
Which could be considered controlling income or spending, stealing belongings, or even property damage. Threats, we have verbal threats of bodily injury or harm and physical threats. So maybe drawing back a fist or flinching towards somebody. Animal abuse. I am such a huge dog lover, so harming pets physically or withholding food, water, or health care from them. And I think I'll mention two others. Sexual abuse. One example of that is reproductive coercion. So this could be tampering with birth control or manipulating a pregnancy in a certain way to gain a specific outcome. Unwanted touching, of course, is also part of sexual abuse. And the last one I'll talk about is emotional or psychological abuse. We typically see gaslighting, which is the manipulation of someone, making them question themselves. It can also include using derogatory language or isolating a person from family or friends or not allowing them to work.
Yeah. And I mean, just like Kristen said, I mean, there's just so many different components and behaviors that all relate to that power and control that we don't necessarily think about all the time.
Yep. And those tactics, when somebody knows the other person, then they kind of have an idea of which tactics are going to work best to gain and maintain that power and control.
Yeah, which is then very purposeful, and then that goes to feel very manipulative and scary on that.
Emotional and psychological abuse is typically not criminal behavior. Coercive control is also not criminal behavior, but is so common in domestic violence. Coercive control involves very complex behaviors that victims consider abusive, but are behaviors that might be very, very hard for others to identify. For example, it could be a certain word or a certain act, maybe giving the gift of flowers or even clicking a pen or a certain look. And that certain word or that simple act causes that person to be afraid. Because they know the context, they know the meaning. And so this behavior can be so very difficult for legislators, when they're trying to draft language.
How do you define that?
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or for the criminal justice system to consider as evidence necessary for prosecution.
So, like Kristen sort of jumped and said that her mind, sort of just naturally goes to physical violence when we hear the term domestic violence. I think, my mind, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners' minds, go straight to the image of a woman being the victim. But really, especially when we think about everything that you described, Beth, I mean, anyone can be a victim. And, could you tell us more about then maybe what you see in your work and in the day-to-day aspects? And of course, that CASA works with children. And so, how are children affected by living with or observing domestic violence in their home?
So anyone can be a victim or a perpetrator of domestic violence, but domestic violence is a gender-based crime, meaning it's often perpetrated by men against women. I see that domestic violence spans the life course, so it impacts pregnancy, children, which I'll talk a little bit about, teenagers, young adults, midlife adults, and older adults.
Sure.
And it occurs in intimate partner relationships, but it occurs in other relationships too. We see it in parent-child relationships where that child might be a juvenile or maybe an adult child.
Okay.
We see it in relationships involving in-laws and also in sibling relationships.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
And specifically, how children are affected by living with or observing violence. Well, children witness a lot of violence, unfortunately, and children often repeat behaviors that they observe. For example, if a child is growing up where there's an environment that they're living in with lots of yelling and screaming and hitting and physical abuse, those are going to become learned behaviors associated with what it's like to be in a relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're going to tend to repeat those.
Right.
Experiencing abuse or neglect or witnessing domestic violence, whether it's in the home or in the community, these are considered adverse childhood experiences. Unfortunately, ACEs or adverse childhood experiences are very common.
Yes.
Yeah.
Having these experiences can certainly lead to some long-term negative impacts on a child's health, their physical health, their mental health, their social health, and their ability to form those healthy relationships. The good news is that adverse childhood experiences can be prevented, and there are many protective factors out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Protective factors might be encouraging the importance of school or a child who does well in school, building and maintaining positive friendships, connecting safe and supportive adults to the child that are perhaps outside of the family, maybe like a coach.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe a CASA.
CASA.
Advocate, of
Yes.
course, can be that one trusting, safe adult
Yes.
in a child's life. Caregivers who take the time to learn skills to resolve conflict peacefully, that could be another one. But there are a number of protective factors to consider that can actually help protect against adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah. I'm so glad you listed them because we can focus on that, right? Like if we're trying to think of what can we do to help, that's something that in theory we can focus on is building protective factors.
Right.
But I would love to hear your thoughts, in thinking about wanting to help someone. We would never want to help someone in a way that puts them more at risk.
Right.
So what should we do or what would be your suggestion if we knew someone that we thought maybe needed intervention of some kind?
I just wrote a piece on how to intervene when somebody sees
I'm going to want to read this.
a domestic
Yeah, okay.
violence situation. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I kind of came up with 3. So if you're actually witnessing domestic violence, we want you to call 911, call the police. And witnessing domestic violence actually means that you're seeing an altercation occur or you're overhearing one that's actively happening right now. A second way to think about intervening would be sort of a group intervention. So it can definitely feel uncomfortable and even unsafe to approach a situation that is actively occurring.
Yeah. Right.
So maybe go to the employee or another citizen in the parking lot and ask them if they would be willing to go with you to approach the situation to ask if any help is needed. And the third one would be to create some type of distraction. So it could be honking your horn, it could be turning the volume of your radio up.
Interesting.
Anything to kind of bring awareness that, hey, you're
Someone else
within
is
here.
here.
Someone else
You're
is
in
here.
sight. Yeah.
Well, and it also
Exactly.
may cause someone to turn their head or just,
To,
look
just provide
away
relief
and just
for a second. Yeah.
Yes, and that's what we're looking for, that just brief intermission, that distraction. And if somebody does feel safe,
Those are all
Yeah,
really good tips, and
definitely.
we'll look forward to finding that piece that you wrote. And maybe if we can get the link, we can put a link in our show notes as well, which would be great.
Yeah, that would be great.
Perfect. So Beth, you have been around CASA for a long time, so know that our overarching vision is for every child to have a safe home. But what about you, and this can be personally or just maybe in your role as the domestic violence coordinator, what is your vision when you think about children and families in our community? Or perhaps, what do you hope for victims of abuse?
My vision is that people can have safe and healthy relationships which are free from violence, manipulation, and control, and instead have much more respect, honesty, communication, trust, support, and shared responsibility.
Love that.
I know, you said that so concisely.
Yes.
It's lovely.
But it's perfect.
We want that too. Well, thinking of that vision, we like to end the episodes with just a call to action, something simple that any of us could do to make the community a better place for children. I know the county has a lot of resources available, and I'll provide links in the show notes.
Great.
But what else? Is there something else that you would leave us with as just a call to action for everyone?
I love this question.
Yay.
Prevention includes education, and I think it's so important to have those resources and learn more about domestic violence.
Yeah.
But having knowledge and education, it's somewhat useless if you're not going to take it a step further and act upon it. So my call to action would be that every listener listening to this episode of Vigilant Voices share this episode with at least 3 other people.
I love that.
Yeah.
That is my call to action, because you never know who will need to hear this information and when they might need to hear it.
Thank you for listening to Vigilant Voices, Henrico Casa's new podcast. We have a vision for all children to live in safe, healthy homes. You can help us make that happen. Tell a friend about our podcast and find us on social media.
I believe in the better days.